It tastes good.
There's good one and bad ones. What is considered a good fat? Olive oil, okay. Why is it considered good? Monounsaturated fats, okay. And why is that good? What makes them good? How have they earned that title? Pardon?
Double bonds.
Okay, double bonds. But what, in terms of health, why are they good? How do they pick up bad fats? How do we do that?
With higher HDL.
With our HDL, so monounsaturated fats tend to raise HDL, which is a carrier, transport carrier. What does it carry?
LDLs out.
Pardon?
I mean, it helps to carry the LDLs and get that cholesterol out of our system.
Right, so LDL is produced by what organ?
The liver?
Liver. Liver produces all your fats, mostly. I can't think of anything else it does. So it makes cholesterol and all your lipoproteins, okay? So the LDL is, what's its job? What's the job of fats? Why do we have them?
Insulate organs?
Energy, okay, so we store them away as energy in the form of what? Triglycerides. Why else do we need fats?
Cell membranes.
Cell membranes. What else?
Kind of protect our organs?
Protect our organs. Okay, how such?
I kind of just, I guess, I mean physically by kind of coating them around them and keeping them in place.
That could be, like where,
Yeah.
yes, cushioning, like a physical.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, what else?
Hormones.
Hormones. What else comes from fats? Pardon? Hormones, okay, we got the hormones. Prostaglandins, think back up to where they come from. Arachidonic acid, those are all fat sources. Okay, so there's different, so we've established there's different types of fat. So there's good fat. What is considered a bad fat then? Saturated fat, okay. Why is saturated fat a bad fat? Increases LDL. So the more saturated fat, it's the preferred raw material. If you give it to the liver, it will produce more cholesterol for you. And LDL. So that's the reason why we term it bad and good. Okay. So what else do you know about fats? Just dietary fats.
Solid forms.
Pardon?
The solid forms tend to be the ones higher in the saturated.
Okay, so we have solid fats. Give me an example of, Julie and Taylor, give me examples of solid fats.
Butter.
Butter, what else?
Lard.
Lard, perfect. Lard, shortening, Crisco, okay. And so those are solid fats. They tend to be higher in saturated fats. So usually saturated fats are solid at room temperature. Not always, but usually, okay. What about an oil? Is an oil a fat?
Yeah.
Okay. So an oil is a fat that is liquid at room temperature. Okay, so give me examples of oils.
Avocado.
Say it again.
Avocado.
Oil, okay. Other oils?
Peanut.
Pardon? What'd you say, Trev?
Peanut.
Peanut oil,
Canola.
canola oil, corn oil, coconut, different. So we'll hold that. So coconut, what other? Palm? Hold the tropical ones. We're going to put them over to the side.
Sunflower seed?
Sunflower seeds, safflower oil, vegetable oil. All of those are oils. What makes them different? How's an olive oil different from corn oil?
Composition of the fats?
Composition of the fats, very good. So if you look at them, you've got monounsaturated fats, you've got saturated fats, and you've got polys. Mostly oils are going to be these two. There's not that much saturated fat in oils. Okay, that's why we want people to cook with them. If they're going to use it, use an oil. Don't use Crisco or lard or bacon grease like my grandmother did. So then there's differences here. So what is considered to be a better oil? What composition would be considered to be a better oil to use?
Higher in monounsaturated fats.
Higher in monounsaturated fats. Which of the oils is highest? Olive. That's why olive is preferred, but when you, do you cook with olive oil? Have you ever tried to fry with olive oil?
It's never high enough point.
So it's, the point at which it starts to burn is usually lower than what you would get with a vegetable oil. So a lot of people don't cook with olive oil because of that. But it's good to put in with your, mix with other things, like your dressings would be good, your dipping of breads. If you look on the Mediterranean diet, it's one of the difference between that and a Western diet is they dip their bread in olive oil. We tend to put butter on ours, so a saturated fat versus a monounsaturated. So these are the reasons to look at. That's why you'll see corn oil and vegetable oils usually on the lower end in terms of preferred. Olive oil, safflower oil, usually on the higher end. So those are the differences in oils and solids. Okay, then we get to the palm. What else? Coconut. The trendy oils. Fractionated palm oil. Saw several in here. Palm kernel oil. Those are the two in this one. These are bad. I don't know who brought them in, but they're bad from a dietary standpoint. Okay. So why are people all interested now in buying coconut oil and palm oil? I should take that back. Whoever brought these in was very loving and give you good stuff. In small amounts, these are fine. If you look at the nutrition, it's scary, but otherwise it's fine. So I apologize to whoever brought them in because I know you were trying to do a good thing.
I did it for you guys.
He's trying to kill you off. He's killing off the competition. Okay. Okay, so the palm, the coconut, all of the more trendy things at this point. Why have those become popular?
Because of blogs and
Because of blogs? Is that okay?
food blogs.
Okay, but what are they touting? Why is it better?
I don't know, but I was in a donut store.
Yes?
And so they said they can't use their good old whatever oil, and they have to use palm oil because there's a trans fat ban by the FDA. I don't know exactly. But
That's
what my
true.
donut store
That's
said.
part of that's true. Okay, so they've switched in terms of the ban on trans fat. Okay. Anything else? So they are listed as oils. Are they solids or are they liquids? Solids. You go buy coconut oil, it's a solid. Okay. So they are saturated fats. That's why they're solid. But they are touted, they are a shorter chain saturated fat as compared to the longer chain. I don't know why that is supposed to make it better. I don't. That's beyond mine. If others know, please chime in. Lauren, any on your end?
We were never taught really, but that kind of came, like the coconut and all that came out after I was out of college, so I never used it.
So I look at them as trendy. I usually would steer people away from them, but there are folks who feel like they're more healthy, but they're still a fat, they're still a saturated fat. Okay, let's see. You know a lot, you got a lot of them. Okay, so if you look on page 7, we're starting there. So they're a part of the diet. They're a small part because they're very concentrated fat sources. Concentrated, they're calorically dense. That would be a way to look at them. They are a source of vitamin E. They are a source of essential fatty acids. So essential fatty acids are what? Why do we call them essential? Body can't make them, so you have to get them out of your diet. So those are the ones listed there, linoleic acid and alpha linoleic acid. Let's see. Recommendation for oil in the healthy eating is 5 teaspoons a day. So that can be as butter or oils, either way. So a very small amount. Dietary fats help you absorb vitamin D, E, and K. So if you don't have fat, you can't absorb fat, you will eventually see a loss of those levels in the body. We'll see if we talk about bariatric surgery. Those people have a hard time absorbing fat, so we have to replace their A, D, E, and K when they, after they have surgery. Talked about calorically dense, talked about those. Okay, I think we got all this. Look over on page 8. So most of the fats you're going to eat are polyunsaturated fats. They're the widest variety around. Mostly in vegetables, nuts, walnuts, very high in polyunsaturated fat, but they're, and to a small extent, animal. So mostly saturated fats come from animal fat sources, except for the palm and the coconut that we talked about. So that's one way to look at it, is that your meats, like beef, is going to be one of your highest. London broil, because it's so delicious, it has the highest fat content. Okay? Pork has fat, but to a much lesser extent. White meat has less than dark meat. So a breast of chicken has lower fat than the leg of a chicken. Same with turkey. Your fish have some of your lowest, except for your fatty fish. So shrimp, very high in cholesterol, very low in saturated fat. Okay? So there, I'd rather people choose that. Cholesterol usually isn't so much, that intake is usually not so much of a problem. It's the saturated fat part we want people to avoid. So bacon, sausage, I see lips going out. The beef, chicken's less, pork is less, then you get to fish. Butter, any of those things we talked about at room temperature, a solid. Eggs, saturated fat, it's 5 grams of fat in an egg, 3.5 of it is saturated. So small amount, but it's if you eat a lot, then that adds to in your diet. We talked about the monounsaturated fats, very limited group. There they are, there's not a lot. Avocados, very high. Olives, very high. Olive oil, high. Some of the other oils give you some monounsaturated fat. They do not have to put it on the label. You can sometimes infer it from what you know about the food. They'll tell you the fat, the saturated fat, but not the other two that they're required to. They may voluntarily. Nuts, very, very good source of monounsaturated fat. Some seeds as well, and some of your fatty fishes. You should get a serving of this at least every day. If you have people have low HDLs, having them switch their fats to more monounsaturated fats will help. You just have to remember they're calorically dense. Okay? But if you're switching saturated fats for monounsaturated, that's good. So that's one of the things you want to incrementally do with folks is switch them from a poor fat source to a higher fat source. Let's talk about trans fats. So trans fats became popular in the food industry because they wanted foods to stay stable longer. So this was one of the things where they were trying to keep food sources available as long as possible. The problem is that it created a much more atherogenic fat. So here's your cis versus trans fat. So cis are on the same side, the trans are on opposite sides of the carbon atom. So once that was determined that these are very atherogenic lipid fats, there has been a move and a ban away from them. Kathy brought that up. New York City has banned them. So trying to get away from those. They are solid fats. They tend to stay solid at room temperature. Recommendation is that you don't eat them. They are more going to be in processed foods. Again, I told you, if they fall below a certain amount, they can call it 0, but 0 doesn't mean free. But it means extremely low. I think I put down some of the foods that you'll still see them in. I think pizza still has it, unfortunately. Sorry, popcorn. Especially that oil they put over the popcorn at the, don't do that, at the movies. Recommended intake of fats, you should know 30% or less is what's recommended. 10% or less for, less than 10% for saturated fats. Higher the monounsaturated fats you can get, great, lower the saturated fats. The only deviation I would say from this is that the lower that you make the fat content of a person's diet, the more hungry they will get and the more carbs. Fats are filling. They are satisfying. They make things taste good. So when people are trying to switch to a very low-fat diet, it's hard because the food will not taste as good. They will stay hungrier. Often with diabetics, I raise their fat content. Our state is one of the higher fat intakes. We do about 35 to 40% fat in our diet. So people who are really struggling with a low, diabetes, wild blood sugar changes, putting them on a higher fat content usually will help. Going up to 35, but making those better fats usually will help stabilize their blood sugar. Michaela, did they ever address that have you ever heard that out of any of the dietitians? That's why I do a type 2s, but type 1, younger.
Well, yeah, they told me to like reduce my carb load, so I had to replace it with something, so,
Okay.
yeah.
Did they tell you what to replace it with?
They gave me options like protein and fats. I'm not really afraid of fats, so, yeah.
Yeah, because they don't affect blood sugar. They're very low. I told you I wore a glucose sensor one time for 5 days, and I ate a continuous glucose sensor, and I ate a different diet every day. When I ate an Atkins diet, my blood sugar was like 0. Was 0. But there was no variation. All day long, my blood sugar was like this. Now, the day that I ate chocolate all day, it was like this. Even though chocolate has a lot of fat, or at least the chocolate I ate. So, all right, skip the added sugars for now, go to the next page, I moved that, I didn't mean to. I think most of this I have talked about under saturated fats. If you look at the trans fats, it gives you some of the reasons and the process behind it. It's the hydrogenation of fats that led them to become stable at room temperature. They didn't become rancid. You ever kept butter around for a while? Let it get rancid? Okay, it will. Butter will spoil over time. It's nasty. It is. Smells terrible. So that's where you got this, and then the partial hydrogenation. Right. So other words that they'll use are artificial, industrial produced. You can see those on the label, but they really have gone down. Potato chips used to be a big one with trans fats. Yeah.
Didn't they do it like in World War II
Yeah, it's been around a long time.
for the soldiers?
Yes.
So it would stay good.
There it is, that's where I put them. Processed foods, some desserts, microwave popcorn, frozen pizza, margarines, and coffee creamers. Okay. Going back to added sugars. Look at those on your labels. Here's how they may appear. Sugar. That's the first. In this product, the first list is sugar. Then you have glucose fructose syrup, glucose syrup, high fructose corn syrup. So a lot in this one. One time I had a lady who came into the diabetes clinic and her blood sugar was off the chart. And it was right after lunch. I said, "What did you eat?" She said, "Well, I went to Brahms and I got one of those Slurpees." Have I ever told you this story? So she said, we got the green apple. It was, like $1 special. And so I called them and I said, "Okay, what did you put in there? What is in it?" Because she did it every week. They came to the city and they went to Brahms and she got one of these every week. So it wasn't enough to have I think it had ice cream in it and soda, and then for added pleasure, they put a simple sugar syrup in it. Like it didn't have enough to begin with. So you never know what people are adding when you go out to eat. Okay, so examples of added sugar. So looking on the label, Brown sugar, you would recognize corn sweetener, corn syrup, dextrose, fructose, glucose, high fructose corn syrup. They're really trying to move those out of products. Honey, invert sugars, lactose, malts, malt syrup, maltose, molasses, raw sugar, sucrose, trehalose, I'm not even sure. But I love this last one, turbinado. Turbinado sugar, okay? So those are things you can look at on processed foods. Does anybody know that, familiar with it? Can you tell us anything else about it?
As far as looking at the labels?
Turbinado.
Oh, no, not that.
I cook with it sometimes.
What is it?
It's like brown
Yeah.
sugar, so it's almost kind of like raw, like sugar cane.
I see, okay.
My mom uses it. Yeah, like sugar.
Yeah,
in a raw
I've used it.
What's it, is it a cane? A cane
I don't
sugar?
know, the packaging it comes in almost looks like,
It's called sugar in the raw.
like a
Oh.
like
Like
bag
brown,
type of
yeah, paper bag.
The sugar raw is cane sugar.
Cane sugar.
It's produced in Valley.
I've used it for baking.
Still sugar.
I don't know what
Pardon?
it is, though.
It does say turbinado on there.
It does.
All the time, I never.
Okay.
I think it's just comes from like the sugar cane itself. There's nothing, it's not like regular.
It's not a process, not refined.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do? Grind it? Or just add it? Does it melt?
It's already grounded, it's just kind of more coarse.
I see, like
Crystals.
sugar in the raw. Okay. Page 10, so sodium. I try to, when I talk to patients, never call a food bad. I try to get people to eliminate that. Like if I ask them, what do you eat? I eat bad. I eat bad food. I try to get them to get away from that. There really isn't, there are very few foods that are just bad. Like I think sodas are bad. Because there's no value to them except the sugar. So I try to get them to divorce that because then they get all kinds of things wound up in that. Either they know they're bad and so they have a fatal attraction for them, or they feel guilt. So I try to get away from that and looking at things in moderation. Health, promote health. This is what's good health. If you really have to have then let's look at how do you incorporate this into your diet, if you really have to have it. Each serving size there's 2 of them, so each of these is 230 calories. Now for a Zane, that is nothing in a day. For me, that is about, it's more than, it's 20% of my calories. I mean, it's too much for me. But you could talk to people about how to divide it up. Incorporate it, enjoy it when you eat. I had a dietitian friend one time who told me that when she would allow herself a decadent dessert once a week, and she said, I would go to the best place and I would have the best. So she enjoyed hers, she limited it, so it's talking to people about limiting and how to eat healthy. But if you limit things or tell people to restrict things, they will tend to be a magnet for them. So talking to them in a healthy manner. So I do it about sodium. It's like we have to have sodium, it's just that we get too much of it. And too much of most things, and people understand that, then usually get us into trouble. So most of our sodium is in salt, of course. And the eating pattern, or the recommendation is 2,300 milligrams per day or less. If you are eating a lot of processed foods, that is hard to stay under. If you're eating more natural foods, then you can stay under it. You use an app to track your calories or your intake. What do you use?
The MyFitness.
That's what I use.
Macro counter.
Macro counter. Y'all use any different? What do you,
I use MyFitness.
Sophie?
Same.
So it will tell you the sodium intake, what you're doing and how you can set all kinds of goals, and it'll tell you how you're meeting that each day or staying under it. So I told you about the increase in sodium and blood pressure, so that's one of the things that people are pre-diabetic or they're pre-hypertensive, getting them to cut back on the amount of salt. Sometimes it's just becoming aware of where is that salt coming from. It's in everything. You can't hardly escape it if it's something that's made. If you go and buy it raw and make it yourself, then you can control that. Fruits, vegetables have none, grains have none. We add them though. So getting people to look at labels will help them. Maybe using a calorie tracker or a nutrient tracker would also help them. Usually, the more you eat, the more your sodium intake goes up, especially if you're relying on processed foods or fast foods. Okay, questions to this point. So this covers most, I think, of what we talked about your assignment. And then some other information. Okay, let's talk about vegan. Is anybody a vegan in here or a vegetarian that they would admit to, vegetarian? Semi? Okay.
My wife's a lacto-ovo, so if I don't get right food, I'm semi.
It just rolls off your tongue, lacto-ovo vegetarian. Okay. All right, very good. So you all can add to or correct based on what I present. So the benefits is that it's a fairly healthy diet. It lowers the rates of type 2, certain types of cancer, cardiovascular disease, gallbladder disease, because it's low in cholesterol. So a true vegetarian or vegan does not eat any food of animal origin. No meat, no dairy, no eggs, and most don't eat honey. I think with vegans, they also don't use animal products like leather. They won't buy leather or things that are made from animals. Okay, so that's a strict. Lacto-vegetarian doesn't eat meat, fish, poultry, eggs, but they will consume dairy. So Ron described himself as his wife, a lacto-ovo vegetarian. So they consume eggs and dairy, but no meat, poultry, fish, or seafood, right? Okay. Semi-vegetarian or flexitarian, this one's become more popular, will eat dairy, eggs, and small amounts of meat, poultry, fish, seafood. Pescatarians, pesca mean fish, so they will include dairy, eggs, fish, seafood, but no meat or poultry. So a wide variety. So if someone tells you they're vegetarian, realize there's all degrees of that. Get a sense of what they are including in that or how they're defining that, because it will go to risk. If the parents are vegetarian, see if they also have the children on a vegetarian diet. Children raised on a vegetarian diet can do very well, but they may need to see a dietitian just to make sure all nutrients are being met. Pregnant women can carry on a vegetarian diet. It's a very good idea to have them being seen by a dietitian. So the benefits, here you go, Zane. Helps people with kidney disease because it lowers blood pressure. It also, they looked in this study, they looked at cost. The cost of eating vegetarian versus taking the medication to lower their blood pressure, and found that it was economically advantageous. With prediabetes, eating a vegetarian diet decreased the movement onto diabetes or the risk of prediabetes because they ate less sweet, solid fats, meats, and mayonnaise. Okay, so nutrition complete list. As we go through this, you should be patterning. Those that are looking at those fad diets should be looking at these big topics. So what are they? What are the benefits? Their completeness. Look on the next page. Cost, if you can find it. Weight loss. Level of effort. That's a big one. So kind of look at the patterns as we're going through. So vegetarians. Because they don't eat meat or avoid it, then the iron is the problem. And looking at it in children is really important. Because children, especially very young children, if they are not put on a more iron-enriched diet, they can become anemic. So that is the big thing to keep in mind. Boomy, I see you shaking your head. So
Yeah.
you want to share anything about that?
Oh, so like for breakfast, I know that if I eat a handful of cashews, I'll drink orange juice because cashews are high in iron. But then I'll wait 2 hours to drink a cup of coffee because that contains tannins, which inhibit absorption of iron.
Excellent.
So then, I guess you just have to how to manipulate the foods.
Excellent. What she told you was excellent. I hope you were listening. So the thing was the vitamin C. So if you go back and look at our anemia lecture, we talked about iron. We talked about, like with elderly, having them drink it, take it with a cup of orange juice, because that vitamin C increases absorption. So excellent, excellent. And the coffee, I gave you a list in the anemia lecture of foods to avoid when you take your iron. and coffee and tea were one of them because she talked about the tannins. Okay, very good. Vegetarians who don't consume dairy products, or other people who don't consume dairy. It's a common one that people will drop. Their calcium intake can be low, so looking at other sources in their diet, or you could supplement. Calcium is inactivated in the presence of oxalate, so if they eat a lot of leafy green vegetables like especially kale, they can impair absorption, even though they tend to do pretty well. Also, long-term vegetarians can have a B12 deficiency, so taking in usually cereals are fortified with B12, or having a source that's identified is important. Because they tend to be high folate ingesting, then they can mask a megaloblastic anemia, so keep those in mind. Those are important. I would say those are things that I would most likely ask you about, are those deficiencies, so that you'll be aware as a provider. If you look at the top of next page, in terms of cost, we have found a vegetarian diet is cheaper. The reason I put this in there is that when you sit down with patients, they will often tell you a healthy diet is too expensive. I cannot afford it. And so when I worked with, in the family medicine, the dietitian that we worked with, she made up a grocery list for $150 a week or a month. Here is what you can buy a healthy diet and you can eat it. So sometimes you need some ability to come back and talk to them about, well, where do you see the cost going? What would be expensive? Often they'll talk to you about the fruits and vegetables, especially fruits being too high for them to purchase. So here's one that looked at just a Western diet versus a vegetarian, and they found that it was $750 cheaper a year compared to a diet that included meat. And if you look at that third bullet, the vegetarian diet had 25 more servings of vegetables a week, 14 more servings of whole grain, 8 more servings of fruit a week. So they were able to eat healthy with a lower cost. Both plans met the protein requirements for the adults. The meat eaters had more, a lot more, and the vegetarians were just over that. So vegetarians can meet their protein needs. An adult can through the well-planned or well-choiced vegetarian diet. Weight loss is another one. Vegans, vegetarians tend to have lower weights. And they tend to have higher resting metabolic rates, so they burn energy not more efficiently, they burn it at a higher level. And the difference there was thought to be due to the oils, nuts, and seeds that they included in their diet from this study in nutrients. Another study found improved cholesterol. Here's my take on this. This is my opinion. Like when they say that Cheerios or oats, replace your cereal with these foods. I think for the most part what they do, I don't know that they necessarily lower cholesterol in terms of they have an action like a statin does. What they do is they replace higher fat foods. So if you're used to eating breakfast with bacon, eggs, and toast, and you replace it with oatmeal, you have greatly lowered your amount of saturated fat, and so probably your cholesterol will go down if you do that on a consistent basis. That doesn't mean it's bad. I just think that if you're eating a higher grain, lower saturated fat, your cholesterol is going to go down. On the very bottom, that study looked at vegans had the lowest average BMI. So of all the vegetarians, vegans win out in terms usually of health benefits, lower body weight, and longer life. They tend to have decrease in a length of time measured, less all-cause mortality, less diabetes, less cardiovascular disease. You look on page 13, level of effort. You have to think about that. Have you ever changed your diet big time? It takes effort. It takes planning. You may cook differently. You may store things differently. If you're vegetarian, I think you have to go to the grocery store more often because if you're relying on fresh. So the level of effort may be higher in the beginning with regards to meal planning. You also have to think about if you've not lived the life of a vegetarian, do you know how to cook like a vegetarian? So learning that, different things in your pantry. So that upscale or that upfront cost of your energy and creativity can be high. Adjusting intake to satisfy appetite. So if you've eaten a high-fat diet and you go to a vegetarian diet, you're going to have to eat more often. So learning how to pattern and address hunger. Because if you overeat, then weight could go up. So I think that if you've got somebody who's really wanting to switch, make a huge switch, if their switch is from a Western diet to a vegetarian, you might have them see a dietitian. The other is that you may look at incremental. So you see there's all types of vegetarians, so replacing or moving down the scale or up the scale in terms of maybe removing meat, but knowing how to replace that with the protein sources is important. How'd your wife do it, do you know?
She's been since she was 16, so.
Okay. Okay. So that would be my recommendation. Any other comments on that?
I know a lot of people that transition over, they go like too hard, too fast, I think. They
And they
get,
drop
and they just go like straight raw vegetable type stuff or heavy vegetable stuff, and then they're bloated and stuff, and so some of them don't stick with it because of that part of it.
So how did you eat before you met her?
Poorly.
So how did you make that switch?
I'm not sure, it just happened.
Was it
I do
over
remember
time,
at the
or-
beginning though, that it was kind of the same thing. It was like a lot more vegetable intake. I was eating more times a day. And just having to like pick foods that were a little bit less fiber intense for a little while, and then over time it's just normal now.
Very good.
And maybe like eat like once or twice a month.
So she went through a pregnancy as a vegetarian?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
And
did
Henry's
she?
not a vegetarian. Henry eats whatever he wants.
So did she see anybody special? Did the doctor counsel her any differently?
She asked her about it, and she asked her about, so she went through her diet with her, and then after Laura reported her diet, the doctor was fine with her because she was getting enough. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that she was eating eggs, was a big part, and dairy, so she was getting a lot of nutrients.
She got her calcium and what are your protein sources?
Like I said, eggs are a lot, of all kinds of legumes,
Okay, beans mostly,
beans, lentils, chickpeas, those types of things, some soy.
okay, and nuts, you have nuts and,
Yeah.
okay.
Almonds, walnuts, cashews.
Very good. Good. Questions for him or Boomy? Okay. Let's look at fruitarians. I have never met one or anybody who did this. I think it's interesting. I would think it would be a hard diet to maintain yourself on, but some are very passionate about it. So a fruitarian is a person who just eats fruit. Some of them are very even stricter, as they will only eat, like I have there, the fruit has naturally fallen from the tree, that they haven't taken off the tree, haven't bought in a grocery store. Usually all raw, they don't cook them. Some are not as strict. You'll see some of them also eat nuts, seeds, vegetables, and other foods. So fruits are great. They're packed with nutrients, lots of antioxidants. They certainly give you a sugar source, but they are not a total food. And should never be relied on as just the only thing. They can decrease the risk of cancer and other chronic diseases, but for people who have prediabetes, switching to this can cause them very high sugars and diabetics. A lot of people look at fruits as healthy, and they should, but in diabetes you have to limit the amount because the sugar source is too high, especially if they are not well controlled. It can also be dangerous for people who are at risk for triglycerides, high triglycerides. So if it runs in their family, high sugars intake, the body converts it into triglycerides. It can't clear them very well, and so you can develop pancreatitis as a risk. Tooth decay if they're not taking care of their teeth. Can't push the body into starvation mode because it's just not getting enough calories. Strict intake, low zinc would be a problem. Low in protein and fat, so they don't absorb their A, D, E, and K very well. Doesn't include whole grains, doesn't include vegetables. It's a poor diet. It's not one to be promoted, I would say. But if people are telling you that's what they're doing, then needing to understand it. But there are lots of nutrient deficiencies with this diet. Macrobiotic. Anybody familiar with these? This one? To me, this is the diet of the hippies and the 60s. Food in harmony with everything. I'm laughing, but it's so it's like they look at the world as being in harmony and they want to maintain that. So they look at food as being part of that. So that the way they cook, the way that they treat food is to promote and release that energy that will then contribute to well-being. So there's all degrees of them. This used to be a very popular diet. Claims to prevent disease, and it probably does because it promotes health. It promotes the healthy food choices that we've talked about. So claims to prevent heart disease, diabetes, cancer, live a long and healthy life in harmony with the world and the universe. So on page 14, it's essentially a vegetarian diet. It's fruits, it's vegetables, it's grains. Whole grains is the foundation of the diet. They encourage beans and vegetables as well. They also encourage fish, seafood. Some will look at how the food was processed or how the animal was treated as part of whether they would choose it or not. So inner balance is their goal. Whole food is thought to possess abundant energy, which it does. And they're very fixed on where did it grow, how was it grown, under what circumstances was it grown, so they don't want to introduce any violence into their energy flow. They also choose foods to balance, so like the hot and cold that you see, the alkaline and acidic, to balance each other out. Others have a stricter, they chew each mouthful 50 times per mouthful. They don't use electric stoves or microwaves because that interflows with energy flow. They promote cooking food in earthenware, clay, pots, stainless steel, or pans. And they use meditation. So it's a part of their entire lifestyle. They've incorporated it in as part of the way they view the world and energy. So convenience depends on how strict you're going to be and if you're going to have to redo all the pots and pans you have or how you select food. Now that we've got more farm to market, local grown, that may bring this back as a more popular. Finding recipes is harder. I've gone out and looked at them on the web. They're there, but if you don't cook like that, that's different. So there would be some upfront changes. Finding locally grown produce is important. A lot of times they grow their own, and this is usually easier in a place where there are a lot of farmers markets that people can pick from. So the nutrition is good. It emphasizes the whole grains, the vegetables, lean sources of protein. Not as much fruit, no dairy or chicken for the most part. To meet recommendations requires planning as a vegetarian diet would. Okay. Comments about those? Okay. All right, Mediterranean is a big one, so I'll just move it to a different time and go over it. So bring this with you. I probably won't do it at 1 because we're going to talk about exercise, but probably do it on Thursday. Questions? Comments? Food's a big thing. Don't forget to ask about it. All right, why don't you take a break, and Professor Paul will be here.